Well, good morning. It's been a while since I've had a chance to speak to you. So, happy birthday to some, happy Halloween to some. I'm wearing my preacher costume today. All right, as soon as I get my ducks in a row here. Appreciate Brother Kenny reading that. So the popular question that I keep hearing, and anybody I talk to, they keep asking the same question. Who's going to preach Sunday morning? Who's going to preach Sunday night? Is that person trying out for the job? Or are they just filling in? What's going on? I wanted to throw some thoughts at you that might be a little beneficial. And what really is a preacher? When you look back at those words that Brother Kenny read, that was Mark 1, 40 to 45. Take a look at that if you hadn't already turned there. That's Mark 1, 40 to 45. That very last verse, that man had been healed, and it says he went out and began to proclaim it freely. All right? He had a personal encounter with Jesus, and it was life-changing. And it was so important to him that he had to go tell everybody about it. You know, Jesus had said, pretty much summing it up, I'm famous enough, don't go tell everybody about this. But it was so life-changing to this man that he had to tell everybody. And as he began to proclaim it freely, he was doing preaching. So, what does it mean to preach? Well, to do exactly what that guy was doing in Mark 1. Normally, what would enter our mind is something else, maybe. And I'll read from an article that I grabbed online. The term preacher often carries with it the idea of a man who works throughout the week, ministering to the congregation while also working on lessons for Sunday and Wednesday. Unfortunately, that's about as far as the term reaches in our modern minds. In fact, you yourself may not think of yourself as a preacher, but we're going to talk about that this morning, and I'm going to try to convince you differently. All right? Preaching derives from the Hebrew word, I'm going to try this, keriso, which literally means to proclaim or to make public declaration. And that's exactly what this guy's doing in Mark 1. That's what's happening in Acts 10, and that's what's happening in 2 Corinthians 4. If you're taking notes and you want to scribble those down, but you'll be familiar with those where someone went out and actually preached about Jesus. That's what we would normally think of. But I'll throw the question out to you again, because I don't want anybody to miss the question today. Where is the preacher this morning? And so I'm going to give you my answer. Maybe. Wait for it. Wait for it. Wait for it. All right. This morning the preacher is in that photo. If you've been around a while, you're probably in that photo. So, let's open up our Bibles this morning. I see some of those, that's not a very good picture of me looks, but it's okay. We're going to be looking in the Bible. Let's start out in Genesis. That's a great place to start, right? Let's go to Genesis chapter 21. I'm going to read verse 3. And this is why I don't do electronics when I shouldn't do electronics. It's telling me the Wi-Fi's down and I can't do it in New King James. So I'm going to do it in King James, but it's all good. All right. Genesis chapter 21, verse 3. Abraham called the name of his son that was born unto him Isaac. All right, if you look down at verse 20, and God was with the lad, and he grew and dwelt in the wilderness, and he became an archer. Some translations may say he became a hunter. All right, so you might be here this morning, and you might be a hunter. But you know, Isaac was a great preacher or a great teacher. You remember his greatest moment that he didn't even know was going to be his greatest moment when his father took him to sacrifice him? And God truly understood the faith of these people. They were preaching. They were showing great faith. And he was nothing other than a hunter or an archer. Here's another really good one. Let's go over to Nehemiah. That's right before Esther and Job, if you're trying to think of that in your mind. Nehemiah chapter 4. And of course, we all know what was going on in Nehemiah. The walls around the city of Jerusalem had been torn down. It was a point in time where things were kind of depressing, and Nehemiah said, I want to fix this. And he wants to drag a group together and to rebuild the wall. And they're building, and they're building, and they're building. And then in Nehemiah chapter 4, at verse 17, they which built on the wall, and they that bear burdens with those. Now look at this closely. Everyone with one of his hands wrought in the work, and with the other hand held a weapon. Okay? They are doing a dangerous work. In fact, the threat is so serious, I'm hammering with my hammer with one hand, but I've got to be holding my gun in my other hand to ward off the enemy. Now, were there any of these construction workers that were preachers? No. They were just construction workers, but I tell you, they preached a great sermon in the way that with this threat against them, they worked on anyway. I'm looking for Brother Jeff. I'll have to tell him later. I mentioned him in the sermon. He can look it up online. But he's a construction kind of guy. He may not think of himself as a great preacher, but a construction kind of guy can be a great preacher. Let's go to Mark chapter 6. Another fellow who got started out in construction. Jesus. Mark chapter 6 and verse 3. Is not this the carpenter? So we see that the profession of Jesus early on was in carpentry work. But even a guy who grew up a carpenter could be a great preacher. All right. Are we starting to hit a few folks out there in the audience? I know we've got a doctor out there this morning. Let's look at Colossians chapter 4. Colossians chapter 4. All right, I hear those pages turning, and I love that sound. That's right up there with hearing those babies crying, that next generation of folks that'll be up here. Colossians chapter 4, at verse 14, Paul writes, Luke, the beloved physician, and Demas greet you. Luke was a physician, but in the evenings when he wasn't at the office, he was a great gospel preacher. In fact, he wrote a whole book in the New Testament. So yes, you can be a doctor and be a great gospel preacher. Are we hitting a few folks yet? Let's go to Acts 18. As we search for where the preacher is this morning. Acts chapter 18, the first few verses of that. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy, with his wife Priscilla. And he came to them, and because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought. Gotta love that King James. Or they worked together, for by their occupation they were tent makers. I don't know anybody in here that's a tent maker, but I know that Paul sets up a mean tent and loves to camp out in that thing. So in this picture, obviously, we have, in this picture, obviously, we have gotten so far behind. There's our doctor. That's Luke. And here we have, obviously, Paul hanging out at Corinth with Priscilla and Aquila. I know a really old guy, and he took lots of these photos for me. So they were there at Corinth, working together as tent makers. All right. Let's go to Acts chapter 22. That ain't far over there. Just flipping a few pages. We may not have a tent maker with us this morning, but I know we've got some teachers, some current, some retired. Even if you're not professional teachers, I know we've had some that were teaching Bible class this very morning. Acts chapter 22 at verse 3. I am verily a man which am of Jew, born in Tarsus, a city in Cilicia, yet brought up in this city at the feet of a great teacher by the name of Gamaliel. All right. And that's just a mention of him. If you want to dig deeper, you might read Acts chapter 5, where he's actually doing a little bit of his teaching. He's actually helping some folks out. All right. So you might be here this morning. You might be a teacher, but trust me, you're a preacher too. So that's Gamaliel. Of course, in December, he always played Santa. You can tell by the beard, right? All right. And then let's see if I'm in here. Am I a preacher? I don't know. Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. We're going to look at verse 18. And Jesus, walking by the Sea of Galilee, saw two brethren, Simon called Peter and Andrew his brother, casting a net into the sea, for they were fishers. I like to go fishing sometimes. If you read on down a little bit, verse 21, and going on from thence, he saw, who else? James and John. They were mending their nets, and he called them, and these guys, they didn't think twice. They jumped up and they followed Jesus. All right, and if you wonder who's in that boat, you might close your eyes and sing that song, Jesus called them one by one. Peter, Andrew, James, and John. All right, so they were professional fishermen. You don't have to be much of a fisherman to catch more than I do. But even if you enjoy a little fishing on Saturday, you can be a preacher. All right, somebody down there at the lake needs to know about the encounter that you've had with Jesus. All right, just a couple more. I might have missed somebody back there in the back. 2 Samuel, chapter 15. If you're looking for that one, it's, of course, right after 1 Samuel. 2 Samuel, chapter 15, at verse 12. I got some big words for you. And Absalom sent for Ahithophel the Gilonite. I hope I pronounced that right. If I got it wrong, you can correct me later. David's counselor. All right? So even if you're an important person, even if you're a king, you got to look to somebody for guidance, right? Don't we all? We were talking about that in the teen class this morning. Who do you look to for guidance? When you think of a leader, who leads you in the direction that you ought to go? So, Ahithophel the Gilonite is seen pictured here with King David. All right? He's a counselor. But let me tell you, if you're counseling to a king, you are preaching great things every day. All right? Oh, I missed somebody up on the second floor. We've got to go to Luke chapter 5. Luke chapter 5. We got a couple of folks up there on the second floor this morning. They work out on Redstone Arsenal. Luke chapter 5 at verse 27. After these things he went forth and saw a publican named Levi. And when we hear the term publican, we think maybe some kind of negative thoughts. He was a tax collector, but bottom line, Levi, sometimes known as Matthew, was a government employee. All right? Maybe you spend your week working in a government office. But that doesn't mean that when somebody comes by your cube, you don't have opportunity to talk to them about your encounter with Jesus. You too can be a great preacher. All right. Was that easy? Was that fun? So I have carried you on a journey this morning to answer the great question, where is the preacher? Well, I challenge you that while it may be a little bit disappointing, a little bit depressing to not have someone in the preacher's office full time, look in the mirror and find the preacher within and go out, find one person this week and talk to them about what Jesus means to you. And yes, you be the preacher. All right. So that's it this morning. That's all I've got. No matter where you're at in life, you're going to talk to people, or you're going to encounter people, and just like that man healed of leprosy, you can't help but say something. I hope you're proclaiming your encounter with Jesus from time to time. All right? What is it that you preach? Maybe you're in the audience this morning and I've got your mind rolling and you're thinking about what you're preaching, and maybe it's not what it should be. Maybe you've been saying things or doing things that you want to change, and you want to preach something a little bit better with your life. If you want to take the opportunity to put on Christ in baptism, there's never a better opportunity than right now. If you need the prayers of the church, please do come as we stand and sing.